Hello everyone. Today we're beginning our look at art and history and how history impacts a work of art. So looking at this work of art on the PowerPoint slide, we can look at it from a thematic perspective. We can also look at it from the perspective of the elements of art and the principles of organization. Those are both good ways to evaluate a work of art. But today we're going to focus with this work of art on evaluating it from a historical perspective. And before we do that, we kind of want to step back and ask, what is history? And is history just about the past? And how important is history to a work of art? Can history change the meaning of a work of art or make a work of art more or less valuable to us based on its history? Those are the things we're going to be looking at today. Remember that you will be writing a paper that focuses on a historical evaluation on an artist and one of their works of art. So this kind of is a preparation for how to approach a work of art from a historical perspective. So first off, what is history? There was a poem once that described history as a tornado tracking across the landscape. What do you think that means? If you visualize that, how does a tornado tracking across a landscape become an understanding of how historical events might impact us? History is also described as what a society says, does, and sees. And this is very important when we think about the idea that when we are looking at a work of art from another culture, whether it's a present culture or a past culture, we're seeing the way they see. And cultures can develop a collective way of seeing that is very recognizable. Think, for example, of the art from Egypt. It is very recognizable, and that's because they were very good at recording history through their art. History is about time. So we're most comfortable with the notion of history as being about the past. But you can understand too that the history is also about the present, which is history being made, and quite honestly, it's about the future as well, or history about to be made. So when we're thinking about history and how it impacts a work of art, we can't just think about the past or even the present. We must understand that future events, future history can alter how we look at a work of art. And hopefully we'll see that today with this artist and artwork that we'll be looking at right now. Okay, so remember that work of art from our first slide. That was a work created by Michael Richards, an African-American artist. He created this work of art in New York City, New York, in 1999, and the work is a full round sculpture made of resin and steel, with height, width, and depth being 81 inches by 30 inches by 19 inches. Now, think for a moment about what we've just gone through. We've gone through the who, which is Michael Richards. We've gone through the what, which is the artwork. We've gone through the where, New York City. We've gone through the when, 1999. Now we're about to start going through the how and the why. So these are the questions. Who, what, when, where, how, and why are the questions you begin to ask when you're thinking about history. So when we're doing an evaluation based on the elements and principles, we'd be thinking color, line, texture, shape, right? With this case, we're thinking about who, what, when, where, how, and why. So So let's go forward and learn a little bit more about this artwork. But first, just based on what you know, go ahead and pause the video and gauge your interest of this work from 1 to 5. 1 being no interest at all in this particular work of art, this sculpture, or 5 meaning this is one of the most interesting works of art I've ever seen in my life, and all those points in between. Based on what you know right now, how interesting is this work of art to you? Go ahead and pause the video, maybe go back and look at the first slide, and then decide what your level is, and then move on to the next slide. Okay, so we want to know a little bit more about the what, or the work itself. And so we're going to be looking at the title of the work. A title with a work, an artist often has the opportunity to tell you a little bit about what they're doing. That's why it's always great when you find a work of art to evaluate from a historical perspective that has a title, because that helps you understand what the artist was thinking about. So Michael Richards used the title Tar Baby versus Saint Sebastian to title his sculpture. So we see on the left, we see an image of Tar Baby, which is from the Brer Rabbit a book series from the South in 1930s. And then on the right, we see an image of one of the first Christian martyrs, Saint Sebastian. So I want you to think about how those two images reflect upon the work of art. Now, something you might want to know, which will help you, Michael Richards used his own body to create, to serve as the subject for this work of art. So this, in a way, is a self-portrait of Michael Richards himself. He used his own body to create the sculpture with. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video for a little bit. Think about how the words Tar Baby versus Saint Sebastian tells you a little bit more about this work. And then when you're ready, go ahead and start it back up again. Okay, hopefully with what you've done in terms of researching a little bit about Tar Baby versus Saint Sebastian, you've come to understand that Tar Baby is often used as an ethnic slur against African Americans in our culture, and that Saint Sebastian was again one of the first Christian martyrs. And you can see how the sculpture emulates the Saint Sebastian painting by having a body being pierced, but in this case the sculpture, the man is being pierced by airplanes. So why would that be? And then of course you probably looked and saw what he was wearing, which is a military uniform. And again, with the Brer Rabbit or the Tar Baby, reflecting on the notion of how blacks in America were often discriminated against severely with Jim Crow laws in the South, that here we have a black man who's being pierced by airplanes, and he appears to be wearing a military uniform or pilot suit. So, thinking about all that together, pause the video again and engage your interest of the work from 1 to 5. Has your interest increased? Now knowing the title of the work and some of the things that that this work is about, what Michael Richards is talking about with this work, has your interest increased or decreased? Think about it. It's okay to change either way or even stay the same, but think about why or why not based on what you know. And then proceed to the next slide. Okay, so some of you may have already realized that this sculpture is about the Tuskegee Airmen of World War II. Michael Richards was creating a sculpture to honor these very brave pilots who were very successful in their missions during World War II, who, when they came back from the war, still had to endure great injustices from every side of their life. And so he wanted to honor these men by creating a sculpture that showed how they were still brave and strong despite all the slings and arrows that were vaunted against them. So, understanding now that this is a work of art titled Tar Baby versus Saint Sebastian, which was created to honor the Tuskegee Airmen of World War II. Think about now, how does this change your level of interest in this work? Think again, gauge your interest from 1 to 5. Has it increased? Has it decreased? Why or why not? And then move on to the next slide. Okay, so what we were just talking about was art in terms of the present and in terms of the past. And now we're looking at the future. Remember that this was a work of art that was created in 1999. Michael Richards created a sculpture using his own body as a template for the design of an African American man being pierced by airplanes. And we see in the background 2001. So 2 years later, we see the horrific events of 9/11. And so the question becomes, again, does this event in history, which happened after the work of art was created, after this sculpture was created, does history change its meaning any? Now remember, buildings are very much like standing figures. So, and remember also this work of art was created in New York City, again 2 years prior, but can you see any connection? Think about it and then move on to the next slide. And here's what you didn't know. Michael Richards was actually in one of the towers on 9/11. He had won a scholarship that allowed him to have a studio on the 92nd floor. Michael Richards tragically died in that 9/11 attack. But 2 years prior, he creates a self-portrait of himself being pierced by airplanes. And so today, this piece, which was again created in 1999, is seen today as a haunting premonition of the attacks on 9/11. So think about, so obviously now there is a connection. You want to think about, has this changed your interest? Okay? And think about how history is like a living thing which continues to develop and change as time moves on, and it can impact not only persons or cultures, but it can also attack or affect works of art too. So while Michael Richards' piece, Tar Baby versus Saint Sebastian, is still about the Tuskegee Airmen from the 1940s and honoring their bravery, it is also seen today again as a very personal piece about his own life. So hopefully with this example, you're seeing how history can increase the value of a work of art. And hopefully, now that you're understanding the full history of the work of art, that perhaps your interest in this work has increased. And so, when we're looking at history, history again is a record of what a society does, says, and sees. And so when you're looking at a work of art, you're seeing how others see. And when you're evaluating a work of art, you're looking at the who, the what, the when, the where, the how, and the why. For example, not just who painted, who made the work of art, but who is the work about, who bought the work, who has the work now. So you've got to ask those questions, each one of those questions, who, what, when, where, how, and why, completely and thoroughly in order to get the full story. And in getting the full story of a work of art, you're guaranteeing a greater level of interest than if you had not known. Thank you.